Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down big ideas from influential texts. Today, we're jumping into a classic work that asks a huge question about the world we live in.
Okay, let's get right into it. The author sets up what feels like a major paradox of modern politics. On one hand, you often see a real public backlash against big government, and yet government spending and regulation just seem to keep on climbing. So what's going on here? How can both of these things be true at the same time? Let's see how the text unpacks this puzzle.
So, to get our heads around this, the author gives us this really powerful metaphor, the tide of public opinion. The idea is that there are these deep, slow-moving currents of thought that really shape our political world. And if you want to understand policy, you've got to understand the tide first. And as you can see here, these tides, they shift over really long periods, like centuries. The 19th century was all about economic freedom, inspired by people like Adam Smith. But then, the tide turned. It started moving towards a belief in government intervention. Basically, the idea that government should jump in and fix society's big problems really took hold. But the author's point is that by the late 20th century, that tide was starting to go back out. And this right here, this is a fantastic example of just how powerful these tides of opinion can be. Think about it. In the 19th century, Japan's leaders wanted national power, but they adopted the era's big idea, free enterprise, which actually led to more freedom for their people. Contrast that with 20th century India. Its leaders were totally devoted to personal liberty, but they adopted their era's big idea, centralized planning, which, ended up really tying their people up in red tape. The prevailing intellectual climate was what really mattered.
Okay, so that brings us back to the big question, right? If the tide of opinion is turning against big government, then why on earth does it keep getting bigger? Well, the text says it's because of a major flaw in how our political machine works, something it calls the invisible hand in politics.
You've probably heard of Adam Smith's invisible hand, right? The idea that when people act in their own self-interest, it could actually benefit everyone. Well, the author says politics has its own invisible hand, but it works in the complete opposite direction. People can go into politics with the best of intentions, wanting to help everybody, but the system itself pushes them to serve very narrow, special interests instead. This slide does a fantastic job of breaking down the problem. Let's take this example. A subsidy for the merchant marine. It costs taxpayers about $600 million a year. Now, for the 40,000 people who benefit from it, that works out to an extra 15 grand a year for each of them. You bet they're going to fight tooth and nail to keep that. But for the rest of us, the 200 million other people, it costs us about $3 each. I mean, would you even notice that? Would you write your congressperson over $3? Probably not. And this same logic plays out for thousands of programs. But here's where things get interesting. The author points out that when this government overreach gets to be too much, people don't just sit back and take it. They start what you could call a quiet revolt, finding clever little ways to work around the system. And this feeling is just perfectly captured in the story of Pat Brennan. She actually started her own private mail service to compete with the U.S. Post Office. And yeah, she was eventually shut down by the courts, but her story became this symbol of a growing belief that people should be in charge of their own lives, without some bureaucrat in Washington calling all the shots. And look, this isn't some isolated incident. The book points to all sorts of examples of this quiet revolt happening all over the place. You've got tax fiddling in Great Britain. You've got people in Sweden bartering to avoid taxes. A lawyer doing some legal work for a dentist, and the dentist fixes their teeth in return. No money changes hands, so no income to tax. It's businesses using cash, people choosing to work a little less. It's all part of this same pushback. Okay, so what's the big takeaway here? The author argues that fighting these things one by one, this subsidy, that regulation, it's like fighting one of those mythological hydras. You cut off one head and the political machine just grows two more right back. You can't win playing that game. You need a completely different strategy. So instead of getting stuck in the weeds, fighting battle after battle, the idea is to change the fundamental rules of the game itself. The text brings up the First Amendment as the perfect model. The First Amendment doesn't bother with judging every little piece of speech. It just lays down this big, powerful principle. Congress can't make laws that mess with free speech, period. The argument is we need that same kind of thinking for the economy. And the tool to make this kind of fundamental change is already built right into the system, the constitutional amendment process. As you can see, it requires these massive supermajorities to get anything done. And that's the whole point, right? It's supposed to be hard. It forces this huge national conversation, and it's designed to go around the very special interest politics in Washington that it's trying to fix. So that leads us to the author's big proposal, the ultimate solution. It's a set of constitutional amendments that would basically act as an economic Bill of Rights. And here on this slide, you can see some examples of what that might look like. And these are some pretty bold ideas. Notice they aren't about specific programs, they're broad principles. Just think about that first one, an amendment to limit total government spending. Imagine how that would totally change the game in Washington. Suddenly, all those special interests wouldn't be working together to get more money from the taxpayer. They'd be forced to fight each other over a slice of a fixed pie. The whole point is to put real, permanent limits on what the government can do economically. Now remember, these ideas were put forward decades ago, at a time when the author felt that the intellectual tide was really starting to turn. Which leaves us with a really interesting question for today, doesn't it? Where is that tide flowing now? Has it kept going out? Has it come back in? Or is a totally new tide forming that we haven't even seen yet? And that's something to think about. That's our explainer for this week. Thanks for joining us.